What's inside the National Video Game Museum? Gaming treasures, epic nostalgia, and just enough proof for my 8-year-old self to say, told you playing video games would make you cool someday. Hey everybody, and welcome back to LeifTV. Turning 40 is a big deal. Some people throw a party, some people buy a sports car. Me, I celebrated the only way a grown adult with way too many Mario collectibles should, by spending the day at the National Video Game Museum in Dallas, Texas. Let's watch!
It could mean actual advances in the field of science.
It's almost as if you've been doing too much science.
I recently turned 40. My birthday is literally on Christmas Day. That's right, I've spent my entire life sharing a day with a guy who flies a sleigh and gives away free stuff. Tough act to follow. But this year, my amazing wife, Melanie, surprised me with a trip to the National Video Game Museum in Dallas. What's in store for this video? Well, we're doing a full museum tour, taking a look at some very cool displays, and taking a trip down memory lane as I reflect on 40 years of my life in gaming. And yes, I'll even hit up their arcade to show off some questionable skills. But wait, there's more. I'm counting down my top 5 favorite exhibits, and at the end, we'll wrap things up with cake, presents, and unwrapping a few retro games that probably belong in this museum. So grab a controller and settle in. This is going to be a birthday celebration like no other. Right as you walk in, you're greeted by what can only be described as a jungle gym for retro gamers. A towering maze of old consoles and vintage TVs looping retro game footage. My nephew, already flexing his gamer credentials with Pac-Man socks and a Pokémon shirt, was immediately impressed. But then I saw it. On one of those screens was an episode of the Super Mario Bros. Super Show, my very first favorite TV show. This was the show I would sprint home to watch. I even recorded it on VHS so I could watch it over and over, wearing that tape out for years. After snagging our tickets, the very first thing you see is the museum's mascot statue, a lineup of the greatest icons in video game history, all standing shoulder to shoulder like the Avengers of retro gaming. Naturally, my niece and I struck a pose for a photo op. Let's take a quick tour. First up is a wall of playable retro consoles, each hooked up to its own dedicated TV. I gave Double Dragon on the Sega Master System a go, while my brother went full 1997 with GoldenEye on the N64, and my nephew was living his best life on Super Mario All-Stars for the SNES. Just a few steps away, there's an entire wall of vintage board games based on video games. Pac-Man, Frogger, Q*bert, Zaxxon, F-Zero, Tetris, Mario Golf, Street Fighter II, Double Dragon, Pitfall, and even The Legend of Zelda. Proof that, yes, we tried to gamify literally everything back in the day, even other games. Next up is a display wall packed with notable video games and gaming merch. Here they've got Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Sonic, Nintendo, Pokemon, and Mario cereals proudly on display. From there, we wandered into some vintage bedroom setups straight out of the 70s and 80s, complete with Max Headroom posters. I couldn't resist sitting down to play some in television, which made me feel both ancient and oddly at home. And then the crown jewel, the arcade. It's a medium-sized room crammed with wall-to-wall arcade cabinets. My niece had a blast with Galaxian and Mappy. My wife Melanie crushed it on Pac-Man, and I played Rampage with my niece, reliving the good old days when I used to battle that game at Pizza Hut as a kid. Back then, Pizza Hut was a sit-down restaurant with arcade machines, and I would beeline to Rampage or the Simpsons arcade game every chance I got. Oh, and playing Spy Hunter here gave me an instant flashback to kindergarten at my babysitter's house, where I'd spend hours glued to the NES port of that game. Honestly, Spy Hunter might have been the only thing that made being babysat worth it. Coming in at number 5 of my top favorite exhibits is the museum's console library. Right in the middle of the room, there's a TV hooked up to what can only be described as giant SNES controllers on steroids. These bad boys are wired into a gaming wiki, letting you dig up all sorts of gaming facts and trivia with the grace of someone typing with oven mitts. Nearby, there's a glorious console wall displaying just about every video game system you can imagine, some of which you might might actually even remember. And right next to it is the controller wall, a quick crash course in how controllers have evolved over the years, from the simple joystick to whatever the Nintendo 64 was trying to do. It's a reminder of just how much progress we've made in not hurting our hands while gaming. The Sega section of the museum is basically my childhood dreams in display case form. They've got rare Sega CD and Saturn games that had me doing double takes. There's even a store display of Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which took me right back to the Christmas when I unwrapped my Sega Genesis.
Oh, yay! Oh my god! Genesis! Lay!
Whoa, you got a Genesis?
Growing up, I didn't have Super Nintendo. I was a Sega kid. My brother and I would play Sonic the Hedgehog, Air Buster, and Golden Axe whenever we had the chance. I was always Sonic, of course, and I'd run so fast that Tails would be left completely off screen, probably questioning his life choices. They've also got the infamous Sega Activator, which I actually owned. I used to flail my way through Eternal Champions, fighting like I was in the game while my character ignored every single one of my moves. They even have Toe Jam and Earl design books. That game got me through a nasty bout of pneumonia as a kid. I rented it along with Mickey's Castle of Illusion and Quackshot. For the record, I still own around 120 Sega Genesis games, along with a respectable stash of Sega CD, 32X, Saturn, and Dreamcast titles. Sega kids, we never really grow up, we just collect more games. Coming in at number 4 on my list of favorite exhibits is the Playable Computer Exhibit, a glorious wall of vintage computers, each one booted up and ready to transport you back to the golden age of floppy disks and CRT monitors. It immediately reminded me of the old Macintosh I grew up with. I would spend hours playing Sid Meier's Pirates and the manhole on that thing. Sure, we eventually switched to Windows in the late 90s, but deep down, I was always an Apple kid. This exhibit also gave me major flashbacks to my elementary school's computer lab, where my mom worked. We'd play the Oregon Trail, Reader Rabbit, Math Blasters, and the most Canadian game ever, Cross Country Canada, on those old clunky IBM machines. These days, I've got my own vintage collection at home, including a Macintosh SE30 and an original fruit-colored iMac. Oh, and let's not forget the treasure trove of big box games and floppy disks I've accumulated. Basically, if you're looking for someone to lead the charge in a retro computing revolution, I'm your guy. Tucked away in a cozy corner of the museum is a shrine to vintage handheld gaming, the place where pixelated dreams and AA batteries go to live forever. I found my brother and nephew fully camped out in here, lost in the nostalgia of tiny screens and chunky plastic buttons. The display shelves are stacked with Game Boys of every variety, original, pocket, color, advance, you name it. And right next to them was a collection of Game & Watch handhelds, Nintendo's first real foray into making sure kids ignored their homework. I never actually owned an original Game Boy. My parents got my brother and me a Sega Game Gear instead. That meant long road trips to my grandparents' ranch were filled with Sonic the Hedgehog, Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco GP2, and Tails Adventure, all in glorious full color, at least for as long as the batteries lasted. And yeah, I still have that original Game Gear to this day, along with around 20 games for it. Plus, I eventually picked up 26 Game Boy games because, well, let's be honest, I had some catching up to do. Coming in at number 3 of my top 5 favorite exhibits is the Pokémon Exhibit, smack dab in the center of the museum, packed with video games, trading cards, and enough merch to make a Pokemon jealous. It's a shrine to the franchise that took over childhoods, and my brother and I stood there reminiscing about the time I imported Pokemon Gold from Japan in 1999, an entire year before it would release in the US. The only problem was I don't speak Japanese, but did that stop me? Absolutely not. I powered through, guessing my way through battles, menus, and what I assume were life-altering plot points. All I knew was that new Pokemon was happening, and that was enough. And speaking of things that should have happened, back in 1999, Blockbuster held a Pokemon Snap Take Your Best Shot contest, where the winner got a free trip to Australia. I submitted the higher scoring photo in the game, which was Mew in a very specific pose, and technically got first place, but I was tied with other people who got the same score. The tiebreaker was a heartfelt essay about how much I loved Pokemon, and I poured my heart into it, and then never heard back. I guess I didn't love Pokemon enough. But the real gut punch, in college, I gave away my original mint Charizard cards. Several of them. You know, the same ones that now go for over $200,000 each in mint condition? That revelation alone has permanently rewired my brain. I no longer give anything away, ever. I now own every Pokemon game and a healthy stash of cards, but I will never be able to afford those Charizards again, and that is why I am a hoarder for life, thanks Pokemon. The N64 exhibit is a shrine to late 90s gaming greatness, featuring rare, complete in-box games. I was obsessed with the N64 before it even came out, so much so that I drew entire comics about it, filling pages with my best guesses of what Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64 would actually be like, based on magazine screenshots and commercials. Basically, I was drawing fan fiction before I even played the games. But nothing could compare to the day my dad took my brother and me to Toys R Us to buy Ocarina of Time. I held that golden cartridge in my hands, praying that nothing catastrophic would happen on the way home that would stop me from playing it. But fate had other plans. My grandma, who was visiting, decided that right then was the perfect time to stop at every store on the way home. Meanwhile, I sat in the back seat vibrating with impatience. But I did eventually get home to play it, and I still own that very same Ocarina of Time cartridge along with about 75 other N64 games. Because some childhood dreams never die, they just get shelved alphabetically. The Virtual Boy exhibit was a rare chance to experience Nintendo's most ambitious headache machine. They actually have one available to play, which is exciting because where else can you relive the moment when Nintendo thought, what if we made a Game Boy, but aggressively red and neck cramp inducing? I was one of the chosen few who actually owned a Virtual Boy as a kid. I remember playing Mario's Tennis and Red Alarm thinking, this is the future. And in a way, I was right. The future is VR, but without the monochrome eye strain and the lingering sense that you're being punished for something. Not many games ever released for the Virtual Boy, and the ones that did are ridiculously expensive now. I somehow own 7 of the 14 North American releases, which is half the library, meaning I'm either a dedicated collector or just really bad at making financial decisions. Coming in at number 2 of my top 5 favorite exhibits is the giant Pong wall. Because if there's one thing that can make Pong more exciting, it's making it absolutely massive. Right near the front of the museum, you can play a supersized game of Pong on a 10-foot TV using a comically large controller. You have to turn this giant knob with both hands, like you're cracking a safe that contains the last slice of pizza. It's one-on-one, and trust me, when this game is this big, the stakes feel way higher than they should. Now, Pong is technically before my time, but I still appreciate it. It's the grandparent of all video games. But this version is pure fun because everything is better when it's absurdly large. Now, before Nintendo was making Mario jump on turtles, they were making baseball training machines, extendable grabby hands. Yep, tucked away in the museum is a collection of Nintendo's vintage home games and toys, complete in their original boxes. And coming in at number 1 on my list of top museum exhibits is the NES Display. No surprise here. The Nintendo Entertainment System wasn't just my first console, it was basically my first love. Sorry, Melanie. My earliest NES memory is from kindergarten, YMCA before school care, where a bunch of older kids gate-kept Mega Man 2 like it was a sacred artifact, and I was just some lowly peasant watching from the sidelines. That moment alone fueled my lifelong obsession. Then there's the crazy story of my DuckTales wish, a true story in which I, a 5-year-old, threw a penny into a fountain and unknowingly wished an actual game into existence. My mom told me I could wish for anything, so I wished for a DuckTales game, and the next morning, DuckTales NES was in my living room. I don't know if my parents even remember that story, but I remember thinking it was like the craziest thing ever. If I had known I had that kind of power, I would have wished for Little Samson instead. Speaking of which, this exhibit has some of the rarest and most expensive NES games ever, like Little Samson, Flintstones, Surprise at Dinosaur Peak, and the elusive Nintendo World Championship cards. And of course, what NES collection would be complete without unlicensed Bible games, and unlicensed adult games, because nothing says wholesome family entertainment like a shelf holding both Bible adventures and bubble bath babes. I've been collecting NES games since college, where my friends and I used to gather around to play random carts, including my first time experiencing Gyromite with Rob the Robot, which was an experience. Today I own 409 NES games, and one day I hope to complete the full North American set of 675. Will it happen? Only time and the bank account will tell. Now here's an exhibit that proves Mario wasn't just about saving princesses, he was also out here teaching life skills. Kind of. This display is packed with Mario's lesser-known computer games. And yes, I actually own Mario Teaches Typing, because who needs Mavis Beacon when you could have a disembodied Mario head screaming at you for wrong keystrokes?
Oh, nice computer you got here. Can I have it?
I also have some other Mario computer games that the museum doesn't have, including Mario Teaches Typing 2, there's a sequel, and also something called Mario's Fundamentals, 5 classic games that teach fundamental learning skills, and also Mario's Game Gallery, on floppy disk. 4 of them, yay! This exhibit is a goldmine of early Mario memorabilia, back when licensing standards were, let's just say, loose. We're talking figurines, puzzles, plates, slippers, a thermos, and even Mario-branded honey cookies. Some of these early depictions of Mario look so off-brand, they belong in witness protection. There's even a Mario mask that looks like something you'd find in a horror movie, where the mascot comes to life and hunts people down in a shopping mall. This whole display is a fascinating look at a time when Mario merch was less officially licensed and more designed by people who maybe heard of him once. This section of the museum is basically a shrine to Nintendo's weirdest peripherals. You've got the Power Glove, which every kid wanted but no one actually knew how to use, and the Power Pad, which I exploited as a loophole to get around my parents' 30 minutes a gaming limit per day when I was a kid. They saw it as exercise, so they allowed me to play it as long as I wanted. So I logged many hours into World Class Track Meet, where you basically just stomp on a mat really fast. They also have a Donkey Kong display with 9 different TVs, each playing a different version of the game, from the Commodore 64 to the Intellivision to the Apple II. The museum has a whole display of random video game merch from the 80s, and it is glorious. We're talking Pac-Man bubblegum, Donkey Kong trading cards, a Frogger watch. It's the kind of weird, wonderful stuff that reminds you just how out of control video game branding was back then. Naturally, I was hoping their gift shop would have more of this vintage magic, but instead, it was just modern merch I've already seen 100 times. Plushies, t-shirts, mugs, the same stuff you'd find at Target, but with a museum price tag. Look, I came here to impulse buy weird, discontinued garbage, not another Mario mug. Give me some crusty old cheat books, and then we'll talk. Back home in Austin, it was just Melanie and me, but Melanie went all out with an 80s themed birthday setup. I'm talking retro tablecloths, plates, balloons. The whole vibe looked like a Trapper Keeper exploded in our dining room. She even dressed the part and handmade some totally tubular decorations for my birthday cake. Even the gift wrap fit the theme. And speaking of presents, Melanie nailed it. She got me Nickelodeon Gak, so now my hands can smell like chemically questionable nostalgia. Also, Mega Man 7 on the SNES. A Keith Haring puzzle to test my brain, Castlevania Dracula X to test my patience, and Harvest Moon to test whether or not I can commit to farm life. But the birthday haul didn't stop there. With my birthday money, I picked up Super Mario Bros. NES Complete in Box and The Secret of Mana for the SNES. Because when you turn 40, you gotta treat yourself to some childhood classics. Oh, and just when I thought my birthday haul was complete, more gifts arrived. Fashionably late in the mail. Melanie really outdid herself because now I have a new Pac-Man board game, a new Sonic tabletop game, a new Mega Man tabletop game, and a new Oregon Trail card game. That's right, now I can die of dysentery in front of all my friends. And that's a wrap on the National Video Game Museum, and I gotta say that place gets a solid 10 out of 10. I mean, they had rare NES games, cursed early Mario merch, and a lineup of Donkey Kong ports so extensive that even Donkey Kong himself would be like, alright, I get it. The museum is basically a time machine into video game history, and while the gift shop was a little too modern for my taste, seriously, where's my vintage Pac-Man bubblegum? Everything else was a retro gaming paradise. If you love video games, history, or just the smell of old electronics, this place is a must visit. And that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, hit that like button, subscribe for more retro adventures, and leave a comment letting me know your favorite classic game or the weirdest piece of video game merch you've ever owned. Did you ever wish for a game and have it magically appear like I did? Or do I just have supernatural DuckTales powers? Let me know. And as always, I'll catch ya next time.